Good morning. We're about to get started. Doo-doo-doo. Edit this.
You guys, for the past
Good morning. Welcome. Just get TikTok going and then we will be ready to go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Hey, Bella. Hi, Courtney. Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started here shortly. I apologize. I was on a phone call and didn't realize that it was past 10:20 and I had not opened up the live. So my apologies. So go ahead and share. Go ahead and share that we are on with your friends and coworkers or whomever. And if you don't already have it pulled up, go ahead and open up your Constitution. Remember, we are looking at the Reconstruction Amendments. So that's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Go ahead and share. If you're new to this space, welcome. I will remind you, if you're new to the space, to jump out right quick, go to my page, click on the YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube, and make sure under description that you click the Google form that is there. So I'm gonna talk to TikTok. Make sure you click the Google form that is there, because once you complete it with an email, y'all do not understand the number of emails that get kicked back. But with a proper email address, then you will be enrolled and you will get the weekly email. But so many of you have typos when you enter your email address. Some of them I can fix, like it might be .con instead of M, or you may leave out the at. And so I can go in and edit those, but so many of them kick back because the email address is wrong. So make sure you carefully enter your email address. And also, if you haven't been getting the emails, it's because when you registered, you didn't put in your email properly. So please just make sure that you do that. All righty. So we are getting started here in about 20 seconds. And so this is, if you're on YouTube, you'll see you can go to the link that's on the screen, law.cornell.edu/Constitution. And that is our resource for our textbook, so to speak, is the U.S. Constitution. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you to everyone who is joining us on TikTok. All right, so let's get started. It is now 10:35, and we're gonna try to stay on a strict schedule in terms of time today. I want to make this more condensed and more streamlined. So we're going to move along as rapidly as possible, but I will take breaks to take questions. So I'm going to watch the time so that I can do that. So I can pause and take questions. So we're 5 minutes and 40 seconds in. So in 20 seconds, I'm going to start the lecture. For those of you who just joining us on TikTok, good morning. If for any reason you have to jump off TikTok, you can always go to Pretty Petty Politics on YouTube and jump right back into the classroom as it is streaming live on YouTube currently. All right, 6 minutes. Let's get started. All right, good morning. Welcome to Federal Government Week 7. This is Week 7. And so today we are continuing our conversation around Reconstruction and the Reconstruction era. And so the Reconstruction era takes place following the Civil War. And we know the Civil War began in April of 1861, ended in about 4 years in 1865. And so that period immediately after the Civil War is denoted as the Reconstruction period. And we can say it lasts anywhere between roughly 5 to 7 years, maybe less than 7, but let's just say 5 to 7 years. So from 65 to around 70-ish to 73, there were Reconstruction efforts that went forth. Again, if you're on TikTok and for any reason you have to leave TikTok or close the app, you can always jump over on YouTube and join us at Pretty Petty Politics. If someone wants to throw that in the TikTok chat, we're Pretty Petty Politics on YouTube. And so we're looking at the 13th Amendment today, which abolished slavery. We've looked at this before. Last week, when we left off with our Week 6 video, we ended class saying two things. One, you all were going to watch the documentary by Ava DuVernay, The 13th. Let me know in the chat if you had a chance to watch that documentary over the course of the past week. Let me know if you've watched that. Let me get me some water. Have y'all had a chance to watch that? Okay, so we got some yeses on both YouTube and TikTok. Perfect. So, oh, really good. So the 13th Amendment, by watching that documentary, I think you get some historical context to the amendment as well as the relevance of the exception to the 13th Amendment is very in your face if you watch that documentary. So the relevance of the exception in the amendment is very in your face. And so we left off last week saying that, one, we will watch that documentary, but also two, that we would pick up talking about that exception, meaning prisons. So from about, 1040 or 1140, depending on which coast you're on or which time zone you're in, we're going to spend a few minutes here talking about the relevancy of the exception and how it impacts us or is impacting current times. So the exception in the 13th Amendment refers to being convicted. No slavery nor involuntary servitude, right? Slavery nor involuntary servitude. Except, right? Except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So that word convicted, CONVICTED. So slavery nor involuntary servitude, comma, and then they throw in the exception, except for basically when someone has been convicted, shall exist in the United States. So slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States, except for if you've been duly convicted. When they wrote this in, what was that, 1862? No, excuse me. When they wrote this in 1864, remember it passed January 1865. So that means it was written probably, or truly it was written sometime in 1864. It passed Congress in January 1865, and it was ratified in December of 1865, like early to mid-December. It was ratified by the states. So when this was written in 1864, the way they wrote this very short amendment, they put the exception in the middle instead of at the end, right? So if I just had to imagine, I'm pretty sure that just knowing our language, right? Knowing the English language, we usually make statements and then we put exceptions at the end. Like that's just natural conversation. You know, you express something and then you say, except for XYZ. The fact that the exception, this is just a J-ism. This is just one of my thoughts, right? This is not law. This is my opinion, my imagination, my years of reading and studying and looking at various cases, various Supreme Court decisions, dissents. That means when a justice disagrees with the majority, a dissent. Years of reading history books, watching documentaries, right? So in my experience, more often than not, we put exceptions at the end, right? It's like cooking, right? They'll tell you what the ingredients are, and then they'll tell you, well, if you want to do it this way, so an exception or an alternate, then do this, right? Same thing with this amendment. I imagine that exception probably should have been at the end, but it was probably forced to be stated in the middle because there was a lot happening in the United States during the time of Reconstruction. Remember, it's drafted during a time of war, right? 1864, we were at war. Who was the United States at war with? The United States was at war with the United States of the Confederacy, the USC. All right. And I think that's important. You know, I'm big on language. So, yes, the United States of the Confederacy. So we don't call it the North versus the South, right? The Union versus the Confederacy is a correct statement, though, the Union versus Confederacy. But the best way to describe it is the United States of America versus the United States of the Confederacy. So I have a question. Someone says, so someone argued and it was added. Absolutely. Absolutely. You watch Congress today. If you've ever seen a bill or an act, yes, most definitely people argue to get things thrown in, especially when we look at congressional bills. So I got a few minutes. I'll say this. You know, earlier this year, I think we may be about 60 days into this new administration. We're probably about 60 days in. So when there was information that came out about spending and what is funded through different acts or through different bills, people were all up in arms like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Well, I want you to know that your members of Congress will say to an author of a bill, I will give you my support if you throw this into that bill. If you add this thing that has absolutely nothing to do with the title of this bill, the purpose of this bill, if you add this in, then I'll give you my support, and I'll bring a handful of others to come and vote and support this bill that'll get behind this bill. So, yes, that happens. That happens all the time. So, yes, it was argued to have that added, right? Absolutely. Um, but why would that need to be, right? And that's where we're going to look at, or that's what we're going to focus on. Why would that exception be so important? Why would people want that exception added into the 13th Amendment? Why would they want that exception? Like, we're not going to have slavery or involuntary servitude, except for if you've been duly convicted, right? Right. And it was done, for lack of better terms, I would say it was almost like a begrudgingly, or maybe not begrudgingly, as like an olive branch. Like, we're going to do you this one, right? So someone on TikTok says, added as a concession, yes, for Southern plantation owners. Remember, they're not owners anymore, though, because most of those plantations have been stripped away by Union armies. But to maintain, I wouldn't call it a working class. Working class people get paid. But to maintain free labor, let's call it what it is. All right. So when we look at that exception, let's look at the placement of that exception. It comes after that first comma. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, comma, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, comma, shall exist within the United States, comma, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now, if we take the exception out, make that full statement sentence, and then at the end of jurisdiction put comma, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. This is just me being a writer, critiquing the way this is written, right? But that would have made more sense. I think it's purposely become, not purposely, I think it has become confusing to people to see that exception right there instead of at the end. But that's nor here nor there. The main thing is to know that the exception exists. Now, we pivot from the exception and we look at the impact of the exception. The impact of the exception is now we have a whole new industry, still big on P, but instead of plantations, what do we have? And we can use, oh gosh, what's the name of it? Louisiana. What's the name of the big prison in Louisiana? Louisiana State Prison. Angola, right? So Angola was a plantation, right? Angola was a plantation. Like, if you literally go to Google right now, you can Google the Angola plantation. Angola is also a nation and the continent we know as Africa. All right. Angola is also a country in Africa. But the Angola plantation, right? The Angola plantation is now the Angola Penitentiary. All right. The Angola Penitentiary. The Angola Penitentiary is the example we can use today, right? So it went from being a plantation to being a prison. I think another famous one, let me just make sure I got this right, because I read a lot and so sometimes I forget. But I want to say Rikers Island used to be a plantation. And I don't know where I get that from. I don't know where I got that from. Rikers Island. I know that the military used it, but I want to say that, yeah, it was a plantation. See, I was right. I had to Google it. So Rikers Island used to be a plantation too. Now what is it? It is a jail. It is probably the most famous, it's most famously known as being a jail. I don't know. I think it's a prison. The island itself is a prison, but there are jails at Rikers Island. It serves as like um, their county jail. So, or like if you're held in jail awaiting trial, you're held at Rikers, if that makes sense. Okay. There are other jails too, but it's famously known for that. All right. So everybody with us. So what's the connection between these things and the 13th Amendment or prisons totally? Well, if we go back, and we're going to go back to Article 1, so we're going to go back into the Constitution. We're going to leave the amendments and go back into the Constitution. But when we look at prisons and jails, what's the connection to the 13th Amendment? Well, part of it is if they've been convicted, now slavery and involuntary servitude has re-entered the conversation, right? If you're convicted, then slavery and involuntary servitude is on it's reintroduced. So now you're living now you're living the exception, right? You're experiencing the exception. But when we look at the first Article 1, when we jump back to the Constitution, what Article 1 shows us is how we get representation. All right. And this is what I want to get into. How do we get representation? We get representation based on population, but population is not restricted to those of us who have our liberty. Population is not restricted to those who live life freely and have this liberty day by day, come and go as we please type of lifestyle. Article 1 representation also extends based on population to those who are incarcerated. We see this with the compromises that took place in order to establish Article 1 of the Constitution. So the Constitution goes like this. The U.S. Constitution goes like this. Title, the United States Constitution, or Constitution of the United States, the preamble, and then Article 1. Article 1 establishes the legislative branch. The legislative branch, we know, has two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, right? So the Senate I'll take away, but the House of Representatives is based on population. The Senate is based on equal representation. So every state has two. And I'm going to keep saying this, and I say this a lot because it's critical for us to understand the impact. So every state has two. So you have two employees in the U.S. Senate, and you have one employee in the U.S. House of Representatives, for a total of 3 congressional representatives. That's why I get mad at town hall meetings where y'all let y'all employee talk to y'all any kind of way. They work for you. And so if your employee is not doing what you want them to do, get rid of them. And it's much easier to get rid of the one, because the one only represents about 700,000 of you, whereas the 2 represents typically, or at least in a state like where I live, Texas, they represent millions of people. They represent the entire state. But the thing about those ones, those who are members of the House of Representatives, although they only represent about 700 to 750,000 people, they there are more of them than there are senators. And part of the reason for that is because of what took place before Article 1 was finalized. And what took place was several compromises and plans or proposals. So you have the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan, right? The Virginia plan wanted representation based off population. And this was supported by other, what we call southern states, or back then we would call planter states, right? So North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. And the reason why they would want representation based off population, there were not a lot of people who had liberty. Most of the population was made up of people who were enslaved. Okay. Population was made up of people who were enslaved. And because of that, they wanted to include their entire population, whereas the New Jersey plan wanted what became the US Senate. They wanted equal representation. And so they were fighting over which one to do. And New Jersey's argument, or the smaller states' argument, the lesser populated places argument was, well, you really don't have that many people because those people you're wanting to count, you don't count them otherwise, meaning those enslaved people. Now, the other reason why those southern states wanted it based off population that included their enslaved population, one, it boosted their numbers, but two, that was the only way they're going to be able to compete with those larger areas along the East Coast, Boston, New York, Philly, right? Because those areas were what they are today, more metropolis. You know, they had larger populations, so therefore the states which they were positioned in had larger populations. And so there was a compromise. Now, the compromise has two names. Well, there was a compromise. It's known as the Connecticut Plan or the Great Compromise. But the Great Compromise says, let's do both. But prior to let's do both, we had what is known as the 3/5 Compromise. Now, most people, when they think of the 3/5 Compromise, they go with, well, we'll just count 3/5 of every enslaved person. So I'm going to drink this water. I'm going to take a third of it down. Okay. Well, that was perfect, right? Y'all really think they was doing math like that? And I love making this example, right? Because it's stupid. You really think that people are going around and saying, okay, buddy, we're not going to count this part of you. No. They had 5 people and they was like, you can count 3 of them. Get another 5, you can count 3 of them. Get another 5, you count 3 of them. But to get in your head and to strip you of your humanity, your pride, and generationally, what we stated was, T Bella laughing at me, what was stated was, and to us, because I believed this for years. And then one day the light bulb just went off like, that's stupid as hell. But the reality is, we pass down notions to people to humiliate them. And we adopt those notions as being truths. And so we continue to humiliate ourselves and to humiliate those around us and that come from us. So we pass along this fallacy, right? This farce, this lie that you're only 3/5 of a human. Bullshit. Right? You see all of me. I ain't no 3/5. You see every inch of me. There's no 3/5 of me, right? Just like there were no 3/5 of my ancestors. They had 5 people. They counted 3. They didn't count 2, and they probably cheated. But 5 people, you count 3. That's the compromise. You can count 3/5 of your enslaved population. And it's a matter of just reading and simple comprehension. Now, do we understand the cruelty, the evil, the wickedness of that time and of present times? Absolutely. We understand that. But I need you, if you don't learn nothing else here today, I need y'all to know these uneducated people, because education was not common at all. You had to be very wealthy to be educated. In fact, you would see the birth of public schools and public education during the era of Reconstruction because of formerly enslaved people started schools for people of all ages. They just jumped into getting education. Okay. And I'm going to start there. Okay. Y'all got that? And as an asterisk or a bonus, you can look at HBCUs. Many of our historically Black colleges and universities are founded during Reconstruction, including the one I graduated from. It was founded in 1867 by formerly enslaved people. Literally, the first day of college, my first year, freshman year, my very first class on the very first day was in a building built by formerly enslaved people at this institution founded by formerly enslaved people in 1867. All right. So I just need to put that out there. So let's jump back to the 1700s, right? 1780s, right? About 80 years prior. Y'all, they weren't doing that kind of math. I just need y'all to understand they was not in there doing fractions. They were looking at 5 people. We're going to count 3. Everybody got that? Can I move on from there? Can I move on from there? All right. Hopefully I can. Let's see. All right. So we have this idea of counting people who are not free. That did not go away with the abolishment of slavery and involuntary servitude. That did not go away with slavery. The thing that established representation in the House of Representatives based on population, and the fact that even people who are incarcerated, or who were enslaved, or the exception, who are incarcerated, those persons are still counted when we look at representation. So the U.S. Census, okay, I'm gonna connect it all back, and this all relates to the 13th Amendment. So when you have a prison in your area, or rural area outside of your city, like I live in Houston, north of Houston, up 45 north, Interstate 45, between Houston and Dallas. So if you're ever driving 45 from Dallas to Houston or Houston to Dallas, you will see a prison in Huntsville, Texas, not Huntsville, Alabama, but in Huntsville, Texas. You'll see 2 things that are going to stand out. You're going to see a large statue in the woods or at the edge of the woods of a white statue that is just ridiculously huge of Sam Houston, who was a former U.S. Senator. And he also is, acknowledged for capturing Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. Okay. And we'll talk about that in another conversation. That'll be one of our minis next week when we talk about just random things, right? So I'm going to have these little mini classes. So we'll talk about him more then. But you will also, on the opposite side of the freeway, you will see this massive prison complex, and that is that those persons housed at that prison complex includes death row offenders. But those persons there, they are counted in the US Census, which means not only are they counted in the US Census, but the representative for the US House of Representatives, the representative for the US, excuse me, for the Texas House of Representatives, they're counting those people when they do this, when they do redistricting, right? Redistricting, the size of your district, all that ends up into dollars. All right. So, how funding is distributed federally and throughout our state is based on the population, right? So, it's to the benefit of rural areas to say, yeah, state of XYZ or private corporation, come build your prison here. It's advantageous to them to have a prison built in their community, is because now they're going to have additional revenue coming in, because now we have these people here, right? So funding has to be distributed based on that population, even though those people aren't free. So that is part of the residual or the residue of the 13th Amendment in a big way. Okay. In a big way. All right. All right. Any questions for me at this time before I move on? I see comments. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. But are there any questions, TikTok or YouTube? No questions? No questions. Okay. All right. So we'll keep going. So with the 13th Amendment, there's the exception, right? The exception is it shall not exist unless you're convicted. Well, what happens to a person who's been convicted? And this is going to take us to the 15th Amendment. We're going to bounce around amongst these Reconstruction era amendments. I know we've read them, but I want to talk about them. What happens once you're no longer convicted, meaning you've completed your sentence? How does that impact your right to vote? And we've kind of talked about this previously. How does that impact your right to vote? 15th Amendment, right? How does that impact your right to vote? Depending on your state, your rights can be restored, or maybe they won't be. It depends on the state in which you, one, of course, where you reside, but two, also it depends on the laws of the state where the conviction took place. Okay. Do they have access to representation if they are counted? So, and thank you for that question, Just My Journey. Can you be more specific with that? Yeah, be a little bit more specific with that. But while I'm waiting on that to be updated in the chat, I will say that the count is more so benefiting the persons in the House of Representatives and those who those in the House of Representatives and those that direct funding. All right. Because I mean, the average person who is not incarcerated don't even lean on their elected representatives. They can call their representatives and their U.S. senators. They can. Now, what type of responsiveness? I mean, think about the responsiveness that you've seen regular schmegular liberated people receive. right? So how do you think that's going to go for someone who, hello, you have a call from Texas State Penitentiary, an inmate at XYZ Penitentiary, right? They represent them. They literally represent them. It's literally in the Constitution that they represent them. And funding is tied to it. Funding is tied. Funding from the federal government is distributed based on population. There are 50 states, right? And the 50 states don't get equal funding because it would be ridiculous to fund Texas and Montana the same way, right? There are probably more people in Houston, in the city of Houston, than there are in the entire state of Montana. In fact, somebody look it up, right? There are more people in the city of Houston, and Montana is freaking huge, right? Than there are in the state of Montana, right? And so why would we fund Montana and Texas the same? That would make no sense. That means the buffalo would have more benefits than the buffalo in Montana would have the same benefits of people in Texas, right? Or have more. So federal funding is based off population. So because Montana has a smaller population, they have less representation. But at the same time, as funding is distributed, it's distributed based on the size of the population. So, and the same way, we look at federal tax collection, right? So you know how that money, you'd be like, who is FICA? You know, who are these people on my check? Wow, this money coming out, right? So when federal taxes are removed from your check, right? When federal taxes are removed, which state do you think is contributing more to the federal government? The state of Texas or the state of Montana? Clearly the answer is state of Texas because there are more people. So the population plays a very large role in funding as well as representation. So T Bella says Montana has 1.1 million, Houston has 2.3. Again, my city has more people, and that's the city. That's not even the metro area. The city has twice as many people as the entire state. But does Montana, let me ask you this. Y'all look this up. Does Montana have any federal prisons? And if so, let's see what the population of those federal prisons are, right? So when you commit a crime, so we're going to look at the census some more. So those of you on YouTube, you'll see census up on the screen. When we look at prisons, just prisons, whether it's federal or state, right? Typically, when you've been convicted and you've been sent to prison, you're probably not going to be incarcerated in the same place where you were convicted, right? You're not going to be imprisoned where you were convicted. So again, representation. We're going to stick with representation. We're still dealing with that First Amendment as much as we're dealing with, Article 1 as we are the 13th Amendment, right? Let's say, y'all know I like to use objects. Larry, can y'all see Larry, this paper clip? There we go. Larry, y'all can't see it on TikTok, so let me put it right here. Larry was convicted of somebody, red rumming somebody, all right? Larry was convicted of red rumming someone, okay? And so Larry was sentenced to 25 years. That was his conviction. Larry was convicted in district court at trial. He went to trial. He didn't plea. Larry went to trial. and Larry was sentenced in Harris County, Texas. Larry not going to do his time in Harris County. Larry going to go to some rural area in Texas and do his time. Okay. Larry is not doing his time in Texas, in Harris County. Now it's 2030. Larry is still in prison at the same prison. Larry's home is Houston, Texas. Matter of fact, he's from 6th Ward, right? He's from the Heights. He's from the Heights. He's from Washington Avenue. Okay. Larry is not going to be counted in the U.S. Census in his neighborhood. Larry is going to be counted over where he's incarcerated. So the revenue, the tax revenue that is distributed based on population is not going to go to where Larry is from. It's going to go to where Larry is at. It ain't going to Larry though, but it's going to that community where he is at. All right. Are you saying federally? It doesn't matter whether it's a federal crime or a state crime. If you red rum or grape somebody, you're going to go to prison. If you live in a city, not saying there aren't any prisons in cities, but prisons generally are not in the city. There may be facilities, holding facilities, transition facilities, and county jails. But once you've been convicted, unless your conviction is typically a misdemeanor or your sentence, a misdemeanor, you're going to go to county jail. But if it's anything greater than that, a felony or a sentence of more than a year, you're going to prison. Prisons are not generally in the city. So you're like, I'm from Central Florida. I'm from Lakeland, Florida. There's no prison in Lakeland, Florida, but up the street, there is a federal prison. If I'm convicted of a federal crime, I may end up at that prison. But if I'm convicted of a state crime, there's no state prison in my hometown either, but there is one not, up the road. I might go there, but they also might send me to South Florida to the state prison. So what I'm saying is moving bodies around in storing them, for lack of better terminology, storing them or incarcerating them in a place other than where they are from. Now we're creating a population in this new area, and that population is going to receive funding based on the census. All right. So in Pennsylvania, there are several prisons in the city. So let me look at Philadelphia. So I'm imagining you're either talking about Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. All right. So in Philadelphia, you have several prisons. I see Auburn, New York, right? Auburn, New York is not New York City. But I bet you a lot of people who are incarcerated in Auburn, New York are from New York City. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to make sure y'all understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they can't exist. I'm saying generally they don't exist. Like Auburn is outside of Syracuse, right? These are in upstate New York. I got you. I got you. Right smack in the middle of the city. Can I bring you up, Cool and Crazy? Let's see how to do this. Send me a request. I'm cooking crazy if you can. All right. Yeah, somebody else gonna send it. Go ahead and request to join. Cooking crazy. Ruby Reed, no baby. I can't do multiple people. I mean, I could, but I'm not doing that. All right. Cooking Crazy, go ahead and send a request so I can bring you up. But in general, you're removing people. But even in that instance, what she's expressing in terms of in the Philadelphia area where there are multiple facilities, if you live in district, because Philadelphia, like Houston, is densely populated, right? I literally moved across the street. I can walk to my old place from here and be there in less than 10 minutes walking. Okay. I literally moved across the street and I moved from one congressional district to the other. That's what I'm talking about in terms of, I don't see it. I don't see it. You request to join the live. And I don't know how to do it, y'all, because I ain't never done it. I just don't know how. But you can literally be from one district in the city and incarcerated in another, right? That new place where you're incarcerated, that new place is going to receive the funding, and your home neighborhood is not. That's all I'm trying to express. So all of it is connected. If one of y'all can tell me how to do this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so talk to us.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me see if I can turn this volume up too. Okay.
Okay. Pennsylvania, it being a commonwealth, as you know, commonwealth, the laws are governed county to county, so they have a lot of prisons in their city. So Allentown has Lehigh County Prison.
Mm-hmm.
You can serve less than 2 years, as you know. Easton has Northampton County Prison. They do have several prisons in their city. Unfortunately, as you know, with Commonwealth, it's about them getting money.
Mm-hmm.
They're all about getting money.
Exactly.
With them getting their money, wanting to get their money, they establish prisons in different cities. So, like I said, you have Northampton County Prison, you have Lehigh County Prison, you have, let's see, depending on the county, you do have the prisons. Then, of course, we have the main prisons where they have Muncie for the women, which that one is out in a rural area. Then they have, what else? There's another prison. I forgot what the other prison is, but unfortunately, we do have jails and prisons in our city.
Right. And so in the city of Philadelphia proper, Philadelphia is Philadelphia County. I got family there, so I kind of know a little bit. Philadelphia is in Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes.
And there are prisons there.
They don't. They're more the jails, like the roundhouse.
Exactly. They typically have metropolitan areas. Typically have county jails in the city, but the surrounding areas, less populated, is where they open up the prisons, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we're saying the same thing. So now you've heard it from a former correctional officer. And she told us, she said, the main objective is what again? To get that what? Say it again.
They have the private prisons also. A lot of people don't know. You also have private prisons where people can get the money.
They get the money.
They say, instead of putting the money where it should go into rehabilitation, they rather keep them in prison because you get paid for each prisoner.
For each bed?
Yes, for each bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that. I do law. I'm actually going back now to get my master's in social work.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing. So y'all heard it from someone who's done this for a living. She's expressed the same thing. Like typically in the city itself, you're going to have your county jails, right? Outside the city, because remember, these census numbers create districts, right? So the district that has the lower population, that's where the prison gonna go. So now they can up their ante because now they're gonna run up their numbers by having these prison facilities there.
And I just want to say one thing. Earlier you had, I feel, a Freudian slip. You said slave, but then you switched it to prisoner. So I now live in Georgia, and one of the things I'm involved with is ending the mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they said that in Georgia prisons, they're actually listed, the inmates are indentured slaves.
Yeah, they're enslaved people. That's legally under the 13th Amendment. Absolutely.
Yeah, so, but I am going to end the live, but I'm still going to watch it. I enjoy it.
Thank you so much. And if you have to hop off TikTok for any reason, you can catch the replay or the live on Pretty Petty Politics on YouTube.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so there. All right, so that was a real example, right? And thank you for coming on. You're my first one. I've never done that before, so thank you. So when we look at prisons, when we look at this 13th Amendment, and we look at Article 1, this is why we started this class the way we did, by going through the entire Constitution, not just jumping into the amendments, because most people don't know the Constitution. They know the amendments to the Constitution, right? And now you see the connectivity to it. When we just look at something as simple that we think of as just innocent, we just want to know how many people are here for data tracking. We look at the U.S. Census, it's so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. So, and the other thing I want to tell you about the census, it doesn't even matter your citizenship when it comes to the U.S. Census. We're counting everyone alive on the date of the U.S. Census Day, or by the date of the U.S. Census Day. And we do this every 10 years, okay? Every 10 years. Something that she spoke about, we'll talk about later, but I do want to highlight it. Private prisons. Again, if you did not do the homework from last week, y'all know we don't have no real homework. Our homework is just enrichment for more learning. If you have not watched the documentary, The 13th by Ava DuVernay on Netflix, I do encourage you to do so. That documentary will give you insight on a lot of this. These private prisons are publicly traded. That means it is, let me get my words right so I don't go all the way off. That means that it is, because it pisses me off. That means that people are being publicly traded in the marketplace, all because of their condition, the condition of their current state of liberty. So because they are incarcerated, they didn't choose the private prison. The state chose to send them to the private prison. Now they are being publicly traded, their bodies. And so if you're making money off that, you don't care about the other part of this, right? But we'll talk about private prisons later, but I do want y'all to watch that documentary. Another thing I'll say about private prisons can sometimes cause decision makers who are supposed to be applying the law equally and fairly, it can cause them to become bought and greedy. There was a judge, I remember this on 60 Minutes many years ago, and I want to say this judge was in Pennsylvania, but there was a judge that was sentencing juveniles that shouldn't have been sentenced, but he was getting kickbacks, and the facilities they were going to were private facilities. we probably could spend an entire year on talking about that industry and studying it and breaking it down, looking at the legalities of it and the financial aspects of it, and it wouldn't be enough time. But that is something that I don't want you to turn a blind eye to. I do want you to recognize that the private prison industry is not just huge, it's very profitable. And unbeknownst to probably many of you on this, watching this live or who will watch this replay, unbeknownst to many of you, some of your investments in your retirement packages, unbeknownst to you, like through your 401k, may be tied to private prisons. And there you have it. And all this relates back to how we started class, the 13th Amendment, that exception to the 13th Amendment. Remember, the 13th Amendment, it literally says what? Except slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their, it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. However, there's an exception in the middle of that that says, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So here's a question, because I like to be petty. That's why it's called Pretty Petty Politics. Because politics are petty. But here's a question. When someone is wrongfully convicted, I know typically states will pay them or settle with them an amount. There's been legislation in different states for a standard way of calculating what to give that person for that wrongful conviction. But what if that person ended up in a private prison where that corporation that owns that private prison has made dollars off of their body dually? Because let me tell you the other thing. Not only are they making money in the marketplace, right? But they're also making money from them having to do labor for corporations that they contract with. Shouldn't they have to pay up a percentage or a fraction of what they would have earned from the marketplace, as well as from the contracts based on the work they did, whether it was for, let's say it was potatoes, or it was making instruments for Boeing, or whatever industry or corporation that prison contracted with, that individual did labor for. These are the things that go through my head. Like, imagine that. Because again, we're not looking at we just regular schmegular people day to day. We look at prison as, oh, that's a place we send people for punishment for committing a crime. But we're missing that it's also a very lucrative business. And because it's a lucrative business, we're not questioning why certain groups of people are being sentenced the way they are. Why is this not rehabilitative? Why we're not being like a 3-year-old. We're not asking the question. We're not asking why. All right. So hopefully y'all got some stuff out of that. But again, go watch the documentary. I don't want to spend our whole lecture on just that. All right. And so more likely than not, they won't be made whole. More likely than not, they won't receive that. But it's not unreasonable to ask. Maybe no one's thought to sue. They have the data because they know exactly how many beds they have. They know exactly how many beds are full. They know exactly how many beds were full on certain days, so they can look at from the moment that person entered their facility to the moment they left. And the reason why we know they have that data because they want to track that data because they're looking at their money. So it's not like they don't know. All right, give me 1 second. Fix this on TikTok. It's not like they don't know. They know, right? And so that's just a thought of mine. Now, let's move on. So, any questions about the 13th? The 13th, that's the name of the documentary. The 13th, 13th. The 13th. It's on Netflix. It's been on Netflix since like 2017, so for about 8 years. All right. Any questions about the 13th Amendment before we move on? I just wanted to iterate that. There is something, but I'll talk about it next week, where I want to talk about the 13th Amendment more, but I'll save that for next week. All right, so we visited the census and the 13th Amendment. We've talked about the 14th Amendment. Let's look at the 15th Amendment and how it's connected to the 13th Amendment. And we've kind of already talked about that. So the 15th Amendment is where we first see voting as a right. All right, the 15th Amendment is where we first see voting as a right. And we see it very clearly in the Constitution through this amendment, right? But the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, meaning ratified in 1870. And it's pretty short, so I'm going to read it to you. Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Put a pin in that. Remember, we're going to look back at the 13th Amendment. Or previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. All right. So 15th Amendment. We just read the 13th Amendment, just looked at the 13th Amendment. Earlier, we talked about how for some people, even though they've completed their time, they've completed their conviction, some states deny them the right to vote. All right. Convicted felons. I want you to look up convicted felons, right to vote in my state. And then you put your state, what state you're in. All right. In Alabama, I'm using Alabama. If you've been convicted, I'm going to read these to you. All right. You must receive a pardon in Alabama. Alabama requires you to hold on. The law has changed since the last time I looked at it. So hold on. It used to be a different way. All right. This is good for me to realize this. All right. All right. So there are certain crimes in Alabama where you have to, to restore your voting rights in Alabama, it requires that you go through a pardon process. So that means it's not automatic. In some places, it's automatic. As long as you've completed your conviction, that means your probation, the conviction itself, any probation that you had, and any fees that were associated, fees or fines, you've satisfied all of that, it's automatic that you can go register to vote. In some states like Alabama, you have to go through a pardon process. All right. You have to go through a pardon process. All right. So, like, oh no, Demi said, Texas, if they have finished their full term of sentence. And their full term of sentence would include the conviction, any probation or parole, as well as any fees associated with the conviction. I know this because I've worked with people who've completed all of this. I've registered people to vote who have completed all of this. I've helped them get registered to vote. In fact, one of my good friends, that's how we became friends, is through meeting and talking about his journey. I interviewed him years ago, and once he satisfied his conviction, so to speak, we got him registered to vote. Okay. And Emily says, in Vermont, you never lose your right to vote. And Emily, I'm not surprised. It's going to be in those southern states, those formerly heavily enslaved population places that you're going to see the more restrictions around voting, and especially around voting as it relates to conviction. So I'm not surprised that would be the case in Vermont. All right. If it's all right, let's see what else y'all got. Demi said Confederate States, basically. All right, let's see what YouTube has. I was just looking at TikTok. Pennsylvania, you must meet several criteria. You can register if you are a pretrial detainee. Yes, that's not a conviction, right? If you're not a felon, yes. So we have project like here in Houston, Harris County, we have this group called Project Orange. And Project Orange literally goes into the county jail and registers people to vote, because county jail is not prison. You haven't been convicted. Typically, people in the county jail are there because they just can't make bail, right? So they can register to vote, right? So yes, pretrial detainees, or if you're serving time for a misdemeanor. Yes, thank you, Valerie, for that. Ohio lets them vote pretty much done with everything. All right. Thank you for that, T Bella. So as you see, every state is different. None of these examples are the same, right? And now I got a homework assignment for myself because I got to see what these updates are in Alabama. That's where I went to law school. So I often reference them, but laws have changed and I haven't lived there in nearly 10 years. Connecticut, voting rights are restored automatically after felony convictions are complete. Thank you, Thurgood. That's out of Connecticut. Louisiana, I'm thinking that's what you're saying, Janaea. Louisiana, you can vote 5 years after release. So every state varies. And this is what we have to become more familiar with, is some states are more restrictive than others. All right. I'm surprised we don't have any Florida stuff today. Usually it's always an example from Florida. Who my home state be? Oh Lord, they so ridiculous. But okay, so the 15th Amendment, this ties back into the 13th Amendment. So based on someone's position in terms of conviction, had they been previously convicted, are they still a convict, right? Or are they finished when they're released, right? So their condition of servitude, are they restricted or are they free to move about as a citizen with restored rights? Okay. All right. So 15th Amendment is dealing with voting. Now, when the 15th Amendment was passed, we claim Florida now, T Bella. We're not doing that. We claim Florida now, baby, because that's where I'm from. We claim Florida all day long. But the 15th Amendment was for men. Let me be clear. It gave men the right to vote. Now, what we and what has been well documented, and you can see through congressional testimony. Lord, y'all download the archives, download as much as you can from the archives, because we don't know how long this is going to be publicly available. But through congressional hearings, you'll hear testimony about different things that people had to do during Reconstruction when it came to voting, particularly when Ulysses S. Grant ran for president. Okay. There was a lot of intimidation done to keep the recently or formerly enslaved people from voting. Okay. So intimidation is nothing new. It's not a new tactic. That tactic had been around since the 15th Amendment. And I'm pretty sure it was around prior to the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment made it so that it was on the books that people could vote regardless of their previous condition of servitude, regardless of their race, color, or, like I said, previous condition of servitude. But there were people registered to vote, including my great grandfather, who registered to vote in 1867 to vote in Glenn County, Georgia in 1867, right? And I have a copy of his voter registration and the X that he signed with. But he registered to vote prior to the passage of the 15th Amendment. I would be foolish to believe that he did not face some opposition as well as intimidation when he went to go vote, particularly when Grant was running for president. Right? When you look at, if any of you watched the documentary, yes, he was a landowner. You're absolutely correct. And that land is still in our family today. Well, some of it was forced to, is strongly encouraged to sell on St. Simon Island there. So it's like Jekyll Island, St. Simon Island, Brunswick, that area. Glenn County, Georgia, by the way. But when we look at this, we can look at, in your email, you saw Wilmington, the Wilmington Massacre was one of those links in your email that I sent you. I encouraged you to watch that documentary that debuted a couple of weeks ago. I think it's still available. And then there was like a podcast, like a 46-minute podcast I wanted you to listen to. Those people experienced intimidation around voting, right? So intimidation has always been used. There have always been tactics pushed to keep certain groups from voting. All right. We saw this with the passage of 100 years, nearly 100 years after the 15th Amendment. We got 15th Amendment ratified in 1870. Then you have the 1860s. So 1860, what year was the Voting Rights Act? When the Voting Rights Act was passed in the late 1960s, we saw intimidation, right? When people would try to register to vote, especially even after the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, people experienced intimidation. They would have to do these ridiculous literacy tests, right? Where they would have to read stuff that had, for no other reason than to keep them from voting. When there were poll taxes, right? Meaning charging people to vote. All of these were tools or acts of intimidation to limit people the right to vote. So then you get to the 1960s, you have this federal act passed through Congress, right? President Lyndon B. Johnson signs it into law, and it has these different chapters, right? Or titles in it. And parts of it required states that had a habit or a reputation of not being so fair, it made it more restrictive. It gave them more oversight and federal involvement, pretty much holding them accountable. And that was until 2013 with the passage of, not the passage, with the decision, the Supreme Court decision made in 2013 in the case of Shelby County, Alabama versus Eric Holder. As you may know, Eric Holder was the Attorney General for the United States at the time. He was Attorney General of the United States during the Obama administration. And so Shelby County, Alabama is a county just south of Jefferson County. Jefferson County is where Birmingham, Alabama is positioned. So basically the suburbs. If you're into high school football, you may have heard of Hoover, Alabama. So Hoover, Alabama, Shelby County, right? Shelby County sued in federal court successfully. And then the decision of Shelby versus Holder, it rolled back some of those civil rights era restrictions immediately. And when I say immediately, not like a year later, not a few months later, but freaking immediately, throughout those formerly Confederate states, those former states that that are famously known for enslaving people. Immediately thereafter, those states filed legislation across the board, including our very own state of Texas, to introduce new legislation to what? Make voting restrictive. And the way they did it was they established voter ID laws. Now, for some of you, you've only known voter ID, but prior to voter ID laws, you could have your voter registration card and go vote, right? I remember one day I had my voter registration card. I had my work ID. And I just showed my work ID. I work for the public schools. I showed my work ID, my work badge, and my voter registration card. I remember being a student at Texas Southern in graduate school, showing my student ID. And I went to a state institution. So therefore, my ID was issued by a state agent or a state organization, that institution, using that and my voter registration card to vote. You can't do that today. Students at Texas universities, meaning state institutions, can't use their student ID today. The only identification that can be used, there's a list. Every state is different. Some states, the more restrictive states, they have very particular IDs that are allowed. So I always tell people, just take your passport. And one is, I love to look at the people's faces when I pull it out, because they're like, oh, this BITCH. But because it beats them all. It is the ultimate, yes, I'm a citizen. Now take that, right? But there are certain IDs that can and cannot be used, right? When voting. So it just depends on your state. For some of you, this is like, I don't know what you're talking about, because we don't have those problems. Here's something that happened in, well, your driver's license doesn't prove citizenship. That was my point about the passport. Driver's license just shows that you're licensed to drive. But in Texas, you can use your driver's license. You can use your concealed handgun license. You can use different forms of ID. Look, someone says, I live in Massachusetts, been voting since 1980 and never showed ID. See what I mean? Like, I mean, you can use a real ID, yeah, but in 2013, that wasn't a thing. So these lists were created particularly to be restrictive. So what happens to particularly people in rural areas, right? People in rural areas, as well as maybe the more elderly who want to vote, who no longer drive, who no longer have, because they don't drive, they don't have an ID, right? How are they impacted? And this is a real thing. Because it doesn't impact you, you may not see it as a real thing. But once you get into this work, you begin to see how it impacts people. But now I want to pivot and talk about Alabama, right? Because I started with that Alabama case in 2013, and we're getting ready to close this out. In Alabama, Governor Robert Bentley, that's the previous governor of Alabama, right now is Kay Ivey, who we call Meemaw. You have to see it to understand. But when Robert Bentley was governor, Robert Bentley ordered a study. He was like, this is after the Supreme Court decision, the Shelby decision. He ordered a study, and the study was to look at the DMVs, right? So these places where you go get your ID around the state, and to look at the cost of their operations. Like, does the cost of the operating the facility make sense, or does it need to be shut down? And so the report came back, and for the most part, everything was fine. But he ordered the closure of several of them, and you can look this up. He ordered the closure of several of them. Well, the areas that he ordered the closures, that left those people in those areas at a deficit, because now they have to, it becomes punitive for them, because now they have to travel further to get an ID. This typically happened through the Black Belt of Alabama. So now you made a requirement, but you took away the access. That makes sense. And this is a real story. You have to ask yourself, why would he do that? Why he do that? Right? Why they do that? This is real. These are the games that are being played with people. All right. This happened. This is not something that happened in the civil rights era. This happened within the last 10 years, 10 or 12 years. Like, this is real life for people. Right? This is real life for people. These are things that really impact people today. Now, for some of us, they're like, just get another ID. Just order one online. Everything ain't always that simple for everybody. We think because we have certain access, we look at our own privileges and think that it's the same way for everyone else. And it's not, right? And we have to be mindful of that, right? Just because I have access, and I could easily just think about and for myself and just go about my day, la-di-da-di-da, right? Or I could choose to have empathy and to not look at things just black and white and actually look at the gray, right? Because the gray leaves a lot of people in the dark too. And so you have people, again, people should not be denied access to voting simply because they can't afford it, or because they're disabled. Yes, Valerie, you right where I was about to say, or because they're elderly. All right. She says you have to also think about the elderly, disabled, or someone who doesn't drive, right? So, and I know they're just regular, just IDs that are not driver's license, but yes, the accessibility. You can't make a requirement and then take away the accessibility. And then you say, well, there's another one 40 miles away. Well, baby, I don't drive. I don't have no car. Hell, I can't even see out my eye, my right eye. Like, you're not thinking about things like that because it's not impacting you, but it is impacting people. And at the end of the day, they still have the right to vote. All right. But you do have organizations that go into communities, go into different areas, like I mentioned Project Orange earlier, to help register people to vote, to get people registered to vote. Some states have online voter registration. I live in Texas. I love Texas. But Texas does not have online voter registration. And for the life of me, as advanced as we are, as much as we brag about industry being here and us having all these tech hubs, and coming here, and we have all these tech conferences. We have Afrotech, we have South by Southwest, which is going on right now. We have all this tech stuff, but as a state, we have not, on purpose, we have not established online voter registration. You cannot register to vote in Texas online. And that is stupid to me. That is stupid. That you have to go in and get registered to vote, or you have to meet someone who can register you to vote, or you go to the post office, which a lot of people don't do anymore. You have to go to the post office and hope they have some of those little cards that you can fill out and drop in the mail without postage. Or you can go online and print the form, the PDF. You can print it, or you can complete it online and then print it, but you still have to mail it in. It should just be a submit button. And we don't have that. As advanced as we are as a state, as massive as we are, as wealthy as we are as a state, we don't have that. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is that? And it is to keep, yes, Tina, yes, those are intentional actions to keep people from voting. And it is. It's intimidation. It's blocking. It's hateration. All right. So just keep in mind that just because you can and everybody has the right, that not everyone has the access. Not everyone has the advantages or the privileges that, sometimes we take for granted. Okay. We have to be mindful of that. So the 15th Amendment, all right, again, 1870, it was passed, the 15th Amendment. This was the last of the Reconstruction era amendments. So again, watch the 13th by Ava DuVernay on Netflix. Next week, we're going to talk more about Reconstruction, but not in terms of amendments, because we've now covered all three of the Reconstruction era amendments, but we're going to continue with Reconstruction. I think I want to do our class on next Friday. It's my spring break, y'all, so I'm trying to rest. Let me be clear. But I am going to do minis with y'all, meaning like a 30 to 45 minute, just explosive, like mini bite. And I might do two a day, some, not all, because again, I'm trying to rest next week. My phone will be on super do not disturb. But there is one thing I want to talk about next week when we have class. So we'll still have our regular class, and I'm saying that's going to be on Friday. So when we come back to class on Friday, we're going to talk about some things that take place during the era of Reconstruction and as a result of those Reconstruction era amendments, and the responsiveness from those formerly USC states. So those USC, those who had joined the United States of the Confederacy, when they returned to the Union, basically come back for statehood as a part of the Union, the things that they did. We're going to talk about different acts that go through Congress. We're going to talk about congressional hearings and different massacres. For homework, if you can, there is a documentary by Henry Louis Gates or Skip Gates. So if you have a PBS, I told y'all this weeks ago, to support your local PBS channel or NPR channel. They're usually the same as your local public media. To support them by making a monthly donation of $5, $10, $15. But you get a PBS account and you can see their documentaries. Like you can go into the library and pull them up. Some of them you don't need an account, but most of them, the good ones, you need an account for to have access. So watch the documentary Reconstruction America After the Civil War, or you can watch it on YouTube. On YouTube, it's about 3 hours and 51 minutes total. On YouTube, you're just gonna deal with like random people popping up in the middle of the documentary, because basically they recorded it and reposted it, and so they have little pop-ups. But that's nor here nor there. But I do recommend you watch that documentary because it gives you visuals and it just gives you substantive information to support your understanding of what took place during Reconstruction and shortly thereafter. In particular, I want to talk about some acts that came through the enforcement acts. So we have these acts called the enforcement acts, and they are in direct response to activity of the KKK. So the KKK is birthed during this same era. And so that terror, so when we go from slavery to Reconstruction, we go to the Black codes, and then we go to the Jim Crow era. And we know the Black codes and Jim Crow era particularly, they last until the 60s. So for many of us, we're one generation away. For some of you, you may have been alive during the Jim Crow era. Some of us, our grandparents were alive during the Jim Crow era. So we're going to look at that. Remember, this class is looking at, as we do this federal government, we're literally going through the history of the country, formerly of the country. I know that people were here before the U.S. Constitution was created, but the United States did not become the United States until until the 13 colonies revolted against England. Okay. So the class is based on when the United States became the United States to present day. So when we look at it, we're not going to always go way back to the Mayflower or all the way back to who all was here. That's not always going to be how this class is. Yes, I'm very aware and knowledgeable, but for the purpose of this course, we're operating from basically the Revolutionary War to present day. All right. And the basis of our course is the U.S. Constitution. And so we're exploring it and how the framework thereof. Some Black codes, are they still active? They are active systemically, absolutely, and attitudinally, yes, ma'am. Some of the Black codes are. All right, systemically, absolutely. All right, any questions for me today? Thank you, Valerie, for giving the title so I can put that on the screen. All right, thank you, Jabari. Anyone else? Anyone have questions? Again, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube. What is it? Pretty Petty Politics. For those of you on TikTok, just go to my page. There's a link to the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube by clicking the bell. Also, make sure you go to the description. There is a Google form. Complete the Google form and make sure you edit your email address. Make sure your email address is correct, because that way you get the weekly email. The weekly email was sent out last night. I think I put good morning on it because I figured most people will open it this morning. A few of you got it this morning because your email kicked back and I was able to edit it myself. I realized they misspelled the .com or they left out the @ So just make sure you're paying attention to that. But any questions? All right, so I have a question for you. What's our homework? What's our homework for this week? Who remembers the homework? I'm going to sip some more water. Watch the 13th. T Bella, you only received week 4. Email me back, T Bella. Email me back from the week 4 email, and then I will update you. And I apologize for that. So the homework is watch Reconstruction America After the Civil War and the 13th. And the way that you know you're watching the right Reconstruction video, it opens up with the June 17th, 2015 massacre at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Yes, we're coming up on 10 years since that happened. All right. Now, before I let y'all go, I made a video a couple of weeks ago, maybe. I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. And I told y'all that we are still on Do Not Disturb. Y'all see my shirt? It says rest, right? This is my brand, so to speak. Yeah. Rest. Okay. So rest is what we're doing. But I gave some instructions about the whole thing with Derek Chauvin, like the whole conversation. And it's because, I'm looking at not just my timeline of preference, but other stuff. And people are looking for us to react and to storm the street, so to speak, just looking for us to give them a reason. And I said it might not be Derek Chauvin, it might be something else. And so before I get to that something else, let me talk about Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to both federal and state prison. He's currently serving those convictions concurrently in federal prison, right? So he's serving both in federal prison. If he were to be pardoned federally, he still has his state conviction to deal with. Now, do I think they would turn him over to the state? I would say 60-40. Like, because this administration just be doing the most. So I'll say 60-40 chances of him being turned over to the state. However, I don't even think that's the one that's going to send shockwaves. I think that we forget there are some people who have only been convicted federally, and the things that they've done. So I want you to keep in mind that when you watch the Reconstruction documentary, I want you to keep in mind some things aren't so long ago. And again, that documentary opens up with the June 17th, 2015 massacre at Mother Emanuel AME Church, or is it CME? Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, where parishioners were enjoying themselves at Bible study one night when someone came into their church during Bible study, sat down and prayed with them, or sat down while they were praying. I won't say prayed with them. I will say prayed on them. And then he began to slaughter the people. Some people survived. Some people survived simply because they played like they were unalive. So please make sure that you are getting your rest, but that you're also doing what brings you peace and keeps your mind at peace, and that you are training yourself to be protected mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. I'm going to be me. I'm not going to be nobody else. So me being me, I'm going to tell you to get into Ephesians and put on your full armor because what we're seeing in the physical doesn't begin to demonstrate what's happening in the spiritual. We are at war. There is a war going on. There's a war going on in the spiritual realm. And the wickedness is also being evidenced in the physical realm. So you're going to be taunted, and I just need you to be ready for what may come. I know some of y'all like, I did not follow you for this, and I don't care. You followed me because you saw the light. So you did follow me for this. You just didn't know you did. All right. I saw the sun and I became it. Okay. So I'm going to shine. And hopefully you all understand and you're reading in between the lines of what I'm saying. And if you're not, eventually I'm just going to just blurt it on out. But just keep yourself and your family covered, knowing that you're covered, but also put on the full armor, like for real, and get into your word. Get the tools by reading. All right. A people perish for nothing else but a lack of knowledge. All right. That's all I got. Unless y'all got some questions for me. You got Reconstruction, America After the Civil War, available on PBS or YouTube. And you have the 13th available on Netflix, the 13th by Ava DuVernay. Watch those two things. That's about 5 or 6 hours worth of screen time, but it's well worth it. So make sure that you stream those or watch those over the course of the next week. I will put up, if you're not following me on TikTok, please follow. But I will put up the little calendar for each of those minis that I'll do next week. And as far as for YouTube, y'all just turn on your notifications so you'll know when I go live. That's the best way I can do it. All right. So peace out. Oh, your schedule, the course thingy. Hold on, because I pulled that up earlier. Your course guide. Your course guide will drop on March 20th. The only way to get that course guide is to be on the email list. I'm sorry. That course guide will drop March 20th. If you want to get on the email list, make sure you go to the YouTube, Pretty Petty Politics. Under the description, there's a Google form. Make sure you register by including your email address. And then when I send that email out with the guide, you will get it. All right. And T Bella, don't forget to email me. I'm in my inbox right now and I have yet to receive an email from you. So please email me so that I can get you caught up, since you hadn't received one in about 3 weeks. All right. I do want to make sure that we take care of that. And I want to shout out the sister from Philly who joined us earlier, right? Who joined us earlier. You guys also look at how those who are incarcerated, when you're incarcerated in this United States of America, based on the 13th Amendment, slavery and involuntary servitude is reintroduced. It exists again. All right. Sure, there are no comments or questions. None. All right. All right. Well, that is it for today. Thank you all so much for joining me. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. YouTube, stay in TikTok. Thank you all. Make sure I'm thinking all of you are subscribed. But if you are subscribed and you have questions, shoot the email. So how do settle for that fat? Hassan, unless you ask me a clearer question, I'm going to assume that you're spam. So yeah. But if you are registered, make sure you shoot me an email if you have questions. If you're in the chat, and I got it. Thank you. I got it, T Bella. You're in the chat and you're not registered. Make sure you get registered so you can start getting the emails. Oh, he said the 13th. So the 13th Amendment, how do we settle for that fact? What do you mean, how do we settle for that fact? Make your question clear. I don't mind answering. I just need to have a clear understanding of what it is that you're asking. And I'm trying to nurture the YouTube more than the TikTok simply because the recording is stored and that way we can get more information out. Hassan, go ahead and clear up your question so that I can answer it for you, sweetheart. All right. Are there any other questions while we're waiting on Hassan with his question? All right. How do we settle for the fact that slavery is still on the books? Are you saying how or why? Well, because it's the law. It is a law. And the way that you change it is through legislation. The way that you get legislation change is through your federal legislators. And we, as a society, we do not hold we don't hold any of our legislators collectively to any degree of accountability. In fact, we trust them at such a rate as our employees that we let them tell us what to do instead of us holding them accountable, telling them what to do. So, long story short, or to the quickest way to your answer is through your representatives, through those federal employees of yours that represent you in the United States Congress as U.S. senators and as your U.S. House of Representative member. And I know that that's not a sexy answer, but that is the truth because they are the ones who write our federal laws. I hope that answered it for you. Any other questions? All right. Any other questions? All right. So again, make sure you're registered so you can get the emails. That on the 20th, the 20th is next Thursday. So next Thursday, you'll get that course guide. And that course guide will pretty much list out resources as well as our schedule moving forward, not by the actual date, but by the week, because y'all know it's either Thursday or Friday when we're going to have class, because that depends on my personal schedule. And y'all, last week, let me tell y'all, oh, this is funny. Remember how I was tired last week? Well, it's because I was congested. I forgot taking these Advil, cold and sinus. Baby, I was drowsy. I was like, why am I so sleepy? It's because I had taken one of these and it caused me to be drowsy. So that's the culprit for those of y'all who were wondering why I was so dragging last week. It's because I took that Advil, cold and sinus, and it just had me toe up, had me sleepy. I think the 13th documentary revealed so much to me about the 13th. Absolutely, Valerie. And it will. The reason why I push documentaries on people, because I understand that life and responsibilities that we have may not afford us the luxury of constantly just being in books. Part of my job requires me to just read a lot as a professor. So I'm constantly reading and learning and, refining myself, gaining more knowledge to make me an even better professor, to give me more expertise in specific areas. But a lot of people are just not afforded that. So I do encourage reputable documentaries to you all so that you can know stuff. And then if you're interested after watching them, then you will on your own delve a little deeper and begin doing your research to gain additional knowledge. All right, Hassan. can we get together for the game plan collectively to have it removed or at least reworded? This is beyond unacceptable. Can we? No, I'm not doing that. I'm resting. I don't think y'all understand what I mean when I say I'm resting. I'm not doing no labor. I'm just not. I feel like we've done enough. This is not my fight no more. And I can't tell you the liberation and get into this moment in life, what it feels like. I don't have the words, but that's where I'm at right now. Now, having said that, yes, Hassan, you can get with people. There are others who are already established that would like to see that change. It's not that I don't want to see it changed. It's just that right now I don't have the bandwidth to participate. And I'm just being honest. I would say you start with your elected employees. You start with them, or not even start with them, but that you hold them accountable. Let's just say that you hold your elected employees accountable, that you begin doing the research and understanding the history of the law itself and the various facets of it, and that you solicit help and community, meaning a group that will do that work. I believe that others will contribute financially, will contribute their voices and their platforms, myself included. But absolutely, it can be done. It would be a new amendment, though. It would be a new amendment. It would not be an edit of the 13th. It would actually have to be a new amendment. All right. Yes, T. Bella said it. Tired. And I'm not tired, though. I don't even use that word. I'm just resting. Every great person in the Bible rested, especially the greatest of them all. He rested in every capacity as God and as the Messiah. He rested. So I'm designed in his image, so I am resting. And there you have it. All right. Any other questions before we shut down for today? And thank you to everyone who will watch this replay. Thank you for supporting and for subscribing to this platform. We're going to have a celebration here soon on this platform. I do ask that you share it and recommend it to your friends and family. Hopefully the information here is, well, I know it has to be worthwhile because I get to see the analytics. So I know people are enjoying it. I'm going to do my own commercial again. Some of you have asked how you can support me. I put it in my email. I ask for support for other people, and it's really easy for me. It's hard for me to ask, but I'm going to say it. If you would like to support me, you can purchase my recipe book, Not by Bread Alone. And it is available on Amazon. And it's available on my website. And I'll put my website up too. Hold on. I done misspelled my own name. So you can support me by ordering this book from Amazon. It comes on Kindle and it comes as a physical book, so you can choose which one you want. I know some of you have purchased it. You shared it with me that you've purchased it. If you would like the ebook, you can go to my website and you can purchase it on there. I'm trying to add it. So you can purchase it from my website. So you should see that scrolling at the bottom. You can purchase it from my website, the ebook, and it will be emailed to you. As long as you provide an active email address, you will receive your email copy of the book. Or like I said, you can order the physical or the Kindle version from Amazon, and that's how you can support me in my efforts with this class. All right. People have asked me for my Cash App. I just don't feel comfortable giving my Cash App and definitely not my Zelle information because I don't want strangers calling my phone or sending me crazy emails. So yeah. So thank you all so much. We are approaching our 2-hour mark. The time now is 12:30 Central Standard Time. Peace out. Have a blessed day. Thank you.